This Airbus A310 taxis well on the taxiway, aligns with the runway and requests for takeoff clearance. Clearance is approved and in no time, the aircraft is gaining speed rapidly on the runway. Shortly the aircraft reaches V1 and the captain initiates a rotation and the A310 starts climbing away to its cruising altitude. But something is wrong. A few seconds just after leaving the runway and reaching an altitude of less than 500 feet above the ground, the plane starts losing altitude and it ends up crashing tragically into the Atlantic Ocean waters just a few meters from the runway. This is the tragic incident of Kenya Airlines Flight 431. Stay tuned. Airlines Flight 431 was a scheduled flight between Abidjan and Nairobi, with a little stopover in Lagos. This flight was supposed to be a direct one to Nairobi, and the stopover was supposed to have happened during the first flight. However, as a result of bad weather in Lagos, Flight 431 waited for 30 minutes over Lagos before the crew made a decision to proceed to Abidjan and do the stopover on their way back to Nairobi. Turns out the plane won't make it to Lagos. The aircraft operated was an Airbus A310. Kenya Airways was already operating the two variants of the A310, that is the -200 and -300. The incident aircraft was the Airbus A310-300 with the registration 5 Yankee Bravo Echo November. It was the shorter and stubbier version of the Airbus A300. It had more technological upgrades to its systems and fuel capacity as well as efficiency. Hence, it could fly further compared to the A300 with a better fuel economy. After diverting to Abidjan, the plane landed safely at local time 15:15 hours. Due to the unfavorable weather conditions in Lagos, the plane's departure went on to be delayed for several hours. During this time, when the plane was being delayed, the crew was changed, and 44-year-old pilot Captain Paul Muthe, who was very experienced with this aircraft, took command. His total flying time was over 11,000 hours, most of which were on the type he was flying that day. During this flight, he was going to be the pilot monitoring. Together with him in the cockpit was a 43-year-old first officer Lazaro Mutumbi Muli. He was more experienced in this aircraft type than the captain and he was going to be the pilot flying. The scheduled departure time of Flight 431 was 9 p.m. local time, which was now approaching fast. Minutes preceding 9 p.m., Flight 431 received clearance and the crew started their before start checklists. At 9 p.m., the flight received clearance to start their engines and taxiing clearance was given a minute later. The plane taxied and lined up with runway 21, which was their assigned runway. They were to depart heading south. The airport was situated just a few meters from the shores of the Atlantic Ocean. Hence, just after takeoff, the aircraft would be flying over it. The before takeoff checklist was performed and at time 9:08, the crew received their takeoff clearance. The takeoff roll appeared to be normal and the crew called out the appropriate calls during this phase. At time 9:08 and 50 seconds, Flight 431 left the runway ground and started climbing towards the ocean as planned. It is from here that things start happening really quickly. 7 seconds after the plane reached takeoff speed, the standard callouts like the positive rate of climb and the landing gear up command was noted on the cockpit voice recorder. 2 seconds later, at 9:08 and 9 seconds, the stall warning sounded on the flight deck. This was bad news to the pilots since a stall during initial climb phase was every pilot's nightmare. Instinctively, the first officer, who was the pilot flying, initiated the stall recovery procedure. He pushed his controls forward, making the plane's nose to drop. This is generally how pilots are trained to get their planes out of a stall. At this point, the plane was less than 400 feet above the ground and the thrust levers were on climbing thrust. Shortly after starting to push the control wheel forward, the ground proximity calls started coming out in the flight deck. These calls are normally useful during landing and no pilot wishes to hear them during climbing phase. First it was the 300 feet, closely followed by 200, then 100, 50, 40, and 30. At this point, the pilot monitoring asked the pilot flying what the problem was and ordered him to start going up. The first officer started pulling back his control wheel but to no effect since the plane was not in full thrust but climbing thrust. As part of a stall recovery procedure, the plane's thrust should be at full during the whole maneuver, which was not the case here. Shortly after the 20 feet ground proximity warning sounded, it was followed by the 10 feet warning. At this point, the aircraft was too low and not producing enough power to make it continue climbing, and sadly, at 9:09 and 24 seconds, which is just 34 seconds after takeoff, Kenya Airways Flight 431 tragically crashed into the Atlantic Ocean and the plane was completely destroyed. 169 people perished and 12 people survived on initial impact. Sadly, two of the survivors later died in the hospital. Just like another plane incident, investigations as to what caused this crash started. There were many theories as to what really caused the crash. Some believed that the plane was wrongly configured for takeoff. Some believed that airspeed alert system of the aircraft was faulty. Some the engines lost power, while some believed that flaps were retracted too early. Some also believed that the center of gravity of the plane was interrupted or even the spoilers and thrust reversers deployed mid-air. After digging deeper, all the above theories were dismissed. It was discovered that the accident happened as a result of false alarm. The stall warning alarm that sounded in the flight deck led to the pilots believing that they were in a situation that they were not in. The pilots, now believing the plane was stalling, started executing the stall recovery procedure, which calls them to decrease the angle of attack of the plane's wing, which is done by pointing its nose down. However, the plane was too low to recover from the sudden nose down direction, hence it ended up crashing. However, if the pilots had pushed the Tonga buttons, it is possible that they could have saved the situation. Also, it was discovered that the two pilots' flight display instruments were correctly working, hence, if they could have paid closer attention to them, they could have deduced that the stall warning alarm was a false alarm. As a result of these findings, it was recommended that pilots be taught on how to recover from stall at low altitudes as well as to tell if the stall was a false alarm. Anyway, that's how Kenya Airways lost its Airbus A310 together with 171 of its passengers. Thank you for watching this episode of Aviation Incident. Which other incident would you like us to cover? Subscribe to this channel and leave a comment. If you would like to support us, feel free to use the number at the description of this video. Also, don't forget to like and share this with your friends. Let's meet at the next expo.